Hi, I'm Gabriel Grinstein. This is part two of my capstone project, database and API. My entry point is GraphQL.js. Um, I use both a RESTful API and a GraphQL API. RESTful API for token authorization and GraphQL for queries and mutations to and from the database. And this file I also connect to the database. I have three endpoints for my RESTful API. Create and send JWT tokens on login. So on user login, it'll create both an access token and a refresh token and save it on the local storage on the client side. Authorize user access with JWT. It'll first check the access token. If that doesn't exist, it'll check if there's a refresh token. If that exists, it'll then give a new access token. As you can see, that's the third endpoint, is a new access token from refresh token. The example below is the authorize endpoint. It starts with a middleware function that grabs the token and checks if it exists. And then here's the authorize endpoint, which will grab the token from the middleware, verify it, returns a 403 if it's malformed, which will log the user out. 401 will then call the new access token, else it'll be successful. Uh, GraphQL only has one endpoint, as you can see. I also use GraphQL for API tools. Here's my schema. My query had three queries: get user by email, and get all users. For my mutations, I use create user, update user, delete user. I did not end up using login user because I ended up using Firebase auth instead. Here's an example of some of my queries. Pretty similar, but they both come in handy in different points of the application. And then my mutations. As you can see, I use the DAW, and I like that because this file will never have to change based on the database, completely independent. I just have to change the import of the DAW variable. So now let's look at the DAW. I use MongoDB in this application, and I use Mongoose to make it easy to connect and communicate with MongoDB. I have two schemas through Mongoose, a user schema and refresh token schema. And for the user schema, here's an example of one of my functions, create user. As you can see, I used bcrypt to create a hash password. There's also an if-else for the password because I use Google Sign-In, and Google Sign-In users will not have a password. Here's an example of a graphical interface of my MongoDB. You can see that the password's encrypted, and in the second example you can see it includes some transactions. Here's an example of a Google sign-in user. There's no password. Some additional functionality I added in the database is refresh tokens. So every time a user signs in, a refresh token is added to a list in the database. Therefore, if the user needs a new access token, it first checks if the refresh token exists in the database. If not, it will send back a 403. If it will, then it will generate a new access token for that user. Okay, thank you.